My family cheered as the notary announced my sister's fortune, then turned to me, placed $1 down, and declared I was getting exactly what I contributed to this family. I'm Rowan, 29 years old, and I watched my mother's face split into a victorious smile as she wrapped her arm around Blair, my older sister, while the notary's words still hung in the air like poison. The leather chair beneath me felt suddenly cold, distant, as if the entire room had shifted away from me in that single moment. Blair's manicured fingers, paid for with the salon visits I'd funded during her difficult transition period, clutched the inheritance documents worth $847.00, like they were a trophy she'd earned through blood and sacrifice. Finally, my Aunt Vera announced from across the mahogany conference table, her voice dripping with satisfaction, someone who actually deserves Mom's money, not the ungrateful one who couldn't even visit her in the hospital. The single-dollar bill sat on the polished wood between us like an accusation. Benjamin Franklin's face stared up at me, crisp and new, as if my family had specifically gone to the bank to get fresh currency for this theatrical humiliation. My father stood behind Blair's chair, his hand on her shoulder, beaming with the kind of pride I'd spent 29 years trying to earn and never once received. "Should we get champagne?" my cousin Mitchell suggested, already reaching for his phone. "This calls for a celebration." I picked up the dollar bill, folded it carefully, and placed it in my jacket pocket. Then I did something that made my mother's triumphant expression flicker with confusion. I smiled. Not a sad smile, not a broken smile, but the kind of smile that comes from knowing something no one else in the room knows. I reached into my briefcase, the same briefcase I'd carried to Grandma's bedside for those 14 months while everyone else was too busy, and pulled out a manila envelope, sliding it across the table to the notary. "Before we finish here," I said, my voice steady and calm, "you should probably review these documents." The notary, a woman named Mrs. Chen who I'd specifically requested for this reading, adjusted her glasses and opened the envelope. I watched her face transform as she scanned the first page, then the second, then rapidly through the rest. The room fell silent as she cleared her throat, her professional composure cracking just slightly. "There appears to be additional documentation," Mrs. Chen said carefully, glancing between me and my family. "Quite substantial documentation, actually. My name is Rowan, and I spent the last 15 years of my life being the family disappointment. While Blair pursued her creative journey, which translated to 3 failed businesses, 2 broken engagements to wealthy men, and approximately $200,000 in family loans she never repaid, I became a forensic accountant. Not glamorous, not exciting, certainly not worthy of dinner table conversation when Blair's latest artistic venture or romantic drama demanded center stage. But here's what my family never bothered to learn about forensic accounting. We're very, very good at finding hidden money, documenting financial irregularities, and building irrefutable cases. We're also excellent at keeping detailed records, understanding tax law, and knowing exactly how to protect assets from people who might try to claim them fraudulently. I grew up watching Blair receive everything I was denied. When she wanted dance lessons, our parents enrolled her in the most expensive studio in the city. When I asked for the same, they told me we couldn't afford it and suggested I take up something more practical, like helping Mom with household chores. Blair's college education at a prestigious art school cost our parents $180,000. Mine at the state university, which I attended on partial scholarship while working 2 jobs, was something they mentioned only when explaining why they couldn't help Blair with her credit card debt. The pattern continued into adulthood. Blair's first business failure, an organic juice bar that lasted exactly 7 months, drained $35,000 from our parents' retirement fund. They called it an investment in her future. When I asked to borrow $3,000 for the CPA exam prep course that would have advanced my career by 2 years, my father told me that real success comes from hard work, not handouts. Grandma Rose was different. She saw me, really saw me. While the rest of the family fawned over Blair's latest Instagram-worthy lifestyle photo shoot, Grandma would ask about my work, my life, my actual feelings. She was the only one who attended my CPA certification ceremony, the only one who called when I got my promotion, the only one who ever said she was proud of me. When Grandma's dementia diagnosis came 3 years ago, I rearranged my entire life to care for her. I moved from my downtown apartment to a place 15 minutes from her house. I hired the best in-home nurses my salary could afford. I spent every evening after work and every weekend managing her care, her medications, her declining health. The family? They sent cards. Sometimes. Blair visited exactly twice in those 3 years, both times with a professional photographer to document her devoted granddaughter persona for social media. My parents came for major holidays, staying just long enough to eat the meals I'd prepared and leave before the difficult parts of caregiving began. Aunt Vera, Uncle Paul, Mitchell, and the rest of the extended family who were now celebrating in the notary's office. They couldn't even be bothered to send flowers on Grandma's birthday. But I kept meticulous records. Every visit I made, every medical bill I paid, every night I slept in the chair beside her hospital bed when she was too frightened and confused to be alone. Every conversation where Grandma told me exactly what she thought about the family that had abandoned her in favor of their own comfortable lives. The 14 months before she died were the hardest of my life. Watching someone you love lose themselves piece by piece, forgetting your name, then your face, then the very concept of who you were to them. It's a special kind of torture. But even in her worst moments, even when she didn't remember I was her granddaughter, Grandma knew I was someone safe, someone who cared. During one of her clearer days, about 6 months before the end, Grandma held my hand and said something I'd never forget. They think I don't see what they are. They think I'm too old, too confused. But I see them perfectly. And I see you too, sweetheart. I see exactly what you've given up to be here with me. They'll try to take even this from you, but I've made arrangements. You'll see. I didn't understand what she meant then. I was too focused on getting her to eat, to take her medications, to stay calm during the difficult sundown hours when the confusion was worst. But Grandma had been a bookkeeper for 40 years before retirement. Even with dementia clouding her mind, the instincts remained. She knew how to protect what mattered. The will that the notary had just read, the one leaving Blair the house, the investments, the jewelry, the 847 Bureau Zero. That was the will my mother had carefully orchestrated during one of Grandma's brief hospitalizations, when I'd been forced to stay at work for an important audit presentation. The will that was conveniently signed by 2 witnesses I'd never met, in a lawyer's office Grandma had never used before, on a day when her medical records showed she'd been given enough pain medication to sedate a horse. The documents in my envelope? Those were different. Those were signed during Grandma's clearer moments, witnessed by her primary care physician and her longtime friend from the Bookkeeping Association. Those were notarized by Mrs. Chen, who had known Grandma for 20 years and visited her twice a month during the final year. Those were backed by medical records showing complete mental competency on the signing dates, by video recordings of Grandma clearly stating her intentions, and by a detailed accounting of every person who had visited her, helped her, or claimed to care about her during her final years. Mrs. Chen looked up from the documents, her expression carefully neutral, but her eyes showing something that might have been satisfaction. "It appears we have 2 wills," she said. One dated 18 months ago and one dated 3 years ago. According to state law, the most recent valid will supersedes all previous documents. However, there are also questions of testamentary capacity and undue influence that must be addressed. My mother's face had gone pale. "What are you talking about? We had the will done properly. Blair is the beneficiary. It's all legal." "I'm sure you believe that," I said quietly, pulling out another document from my briefcase. "This is a letter from Grandma's neurologist, Dr. Patel, specifically addressing her mental state on the day your will was signed. According to his records, Grandma was experiencing a severe episode that day, with complete confusion about time, place, and person. She wouldn't have been able to sign her own name, let alone understand the contents of a legal document." "That's not," my father started. "It's documented," I interrupted, my voice still calm. "I have the hospital admission records, the medication logs, and a sworn affidavit from 3 nurses who were present that day. I also have the security footage from the lawyer's office showing exactly how that will was obtained." Blair's face had lost all color. "You're lying. You're just angry because you know you were never Grandma's favorite." The laugh that escaped me wasn't bitter. It was genuine amusement at the absurdity. "Blair, I was at Grandma's bedside for over 1,400 days. You were there for 2 afternoons. Who do you think she knew better?" I laid out 3 more documents on the table. This is a complete accounting of every dollar I spent on Grandma's care that wasn't reimbursed by her insurance or savings. The total comes to $127,000. This second document is a record of every family member's visits, phone calls, and correspondence with Grandma during her final 3 years. And this third document is Grandma's real will, the one she signed when she was completely lucid, the one where she very specifically outlines exactly what she wants each of you to receive. Mrs. Chen took the documents, her professional mask firmly in place as she reviewed each one. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the rustle of papers and my Aunt Vera's increasingly rapid breathing. "According to these documents," Mrs. Chen said slowly, "and the accompanying medical and legal verification, the will I just read appears to have been executed under questionable circumstances. This earlier will, however, has been properly witnessed, notarized, and includes a detailed statement of testamentary intent that was recorded on video." "This is ridiculous," my mother hissed. "You can't just come in here and—" "She can," Mrs. Chen interrupted firmly, "because this is the legal process, and Ms. Rowan has provided more than sufficient documentation to challenge the validity of the later will. In fact, given the medical evidence, I would say there are grounds for pursuing fraud charges against whoever facilitated the signing of a legal document by someone who was medically incapable of understanding it." The room erupted. My mother demanding to see proof, my father threatening lawsuits, Blair crying about how unfair everything was, Aunt Vera declaring this was all some elaborate scheme. Mitchell actually stood up as if he might physically remove me from the room. I remained seated, calm, waiting. Because this was just the beginning. They didn't know about the financial irregularities I'd discovered in the care facility bills, the ones that showed someone had been stealing from Grandma's account for years. They didn't know about the property assessments I'd found showing the house was worth significantly less than claimed due to undisclosed foundation issues that someone had very carefully hidden. They didn't know about the offshore account Grandma had opened 20 years ago, the one containing assets she'd carefully hidden from the family members she knew would waste them. Most importantly, they didn't know that I'd spent the last 3 years not just caring for Grandma, but also documenting every single instance of their neglect, their cruelty, and their greed. Every time Blair posted photos of expensive vacations while claiming she couldn't afford to visit Grandma. Every time my parents told me they were too stressed to help with care, but showed up at country club events. Every time someone in this room had promised to visit and then canceled at the last minute. As the chaos continued around me, I caught Mrs. Chen's eye. She gave me the smallest nod, the kind of acknowledgement that passes between professionals who recognize competence in each other. Then she raised her voice, cutting through the noise. "I'm going to need everyone to sit down and be quiet, or I will be forced to adjourn this reading and reconvene with attorneys present." She waited until the room settled. "Now, would someone like to explain to me why Grandma Rose's primary care physician, Dr. Patel, called my office 3 days ago specifically to ensure I had received the correct documentation for this reading?" No one answered, because none of them had any idea that Grandma's doctor had been my ally, that during those long hours in hospital waiting rooms and medical appointments, I'd built relationships with every single person involved in Grandma's care. That they'd all seen what I'd seen, a family that only appeared when there was something to gain. I pulled out my phone and placed it on the table. "I also have recordings," I said quietly. Conversations between family members discussing how to handle Grandma's assets, discussions about how to ensure I was properly excluded from any inheritance, plans about what to do with the house before Grandma was even gone. My mother lunged across the table, grabbing for my phone, but I'd already pulled it back. Mrs. Chen stood immediately, her hand on the phone at her desk. "Mrs. Hayes," she said sharply to my mother, "if you cannot control yourself, I will have building security escort you out." "Those recordings are illegal," my father shouted. "You can't use them." "Actually," I said, pulling out yet another document, "in this state, only one party needs to consent to being recorded in a conversation. I was a party to all of these conversations. The recordings are completely admissible." I looked around the room at their faces. The shock, the rage, the dawning realization that maybe, just maybe, The quiet daughter they'd dismissed for 3 decades had been paying attention all along. That maybe the skills that made me good at my job, the attention to detail, the patience, the ability to find truth hidden in numbers and documents, had been applied to something far more personal than corporate fraud cases. "So here's what's going to happen," I continued, my voice still eerily calm, despite the rage I'd been holding back for years. "Mrs. Chen is going to review all of this documentation. She's going to verify its authenticity. And then she's going to read Grandma's real will, the one where she made very specific choices about who deserved what, based on who actually showed up for her when she needed it most." I stood, gathering my briefcase, that $1 bill still in my pocket like a talisman. "And after that, we're all going to have a very long conversation about fraud, elder abuse, and what happens when you underestimate the person you spent 30 years teaching to be invisible." The notary's office door felt heavy as I pushed it open, but my steps were light. Behind me, I could hear the explosion of voices, the accusations, the panic. But I didn't look back. I'd spent my whole life looking back at the family I wanted them to be. Now I was looking forward to the justice Grandma and I had carefully, methodically built together during those quiet evenings when everyone else was too busy to care. They thought they'd won. They thought the dollar bill was the end of the story, my final humiliation, their ultimate triumph. What they didn't understand was that it wasn't an ending at all. It was just the beginning of the most thorough, meticulously documented revenge that a forensic accountant could possibly execute. And unlike my sister's dramatic scenes or my parents' subtle manipulations, my revenge would be built on an unshakable foundation. The truth, documented in triplicate, verified by experts, and completely, utterly unforgivable. Grandma had taught me one final lesson in those last months. The best revenge isn't loud or flashy. It's patient, thorough, and absolutely devastating. And it's always supported by properly filed paperwork. The coffee shop 3 blocks from the notary's office became my war room. I ordered an Americano and opened my laptop, pulling up the files I'd been compiling for the past 18 months. My phone buzzed constantly. 12 missed calls from my mother, 7 from Blair, 4 from my father, whose name in my contacts was still just Graham. I silenced it and focused on the screen. Mrs. Chen had given me exactly what I needed: time. She'd scheduled a formal will contest hearing for 2 weeks from today, which meant my family had 14 days to panic, to scramble, to make mistakes. And they would make mistakes. People always did when they were desperate. My work email pinged. Subject line: urgent, family emergency? It was from Blair, somehow having found my professional address. I deleted it without reading. Then I opened a separate folder on my desktop labeled Hayes Family Financial Analysis 2019-2024. What my family never understood about forensic accounting is that we don't just find hidden money, we find patterns. And the Hayes family had very clear patterns. In 2019, the year before Grandma's diagnosis, Blair's failed catering business mysteriously received a $45 investor contribution that disappeared within 6 months. The investor? A holding company that traced back to Grandma's savings account. Blair had never mentioned this investment. Neither had my parents. In 2020, Graham and my mother, Camille, purchased a vacation timeshare in Florida for $78. The down payment came from a gift that matched exactly the amount Grandma had withdrawn from her account that same week. I had the bank statements proving the connection. In 2021, Aunt Vera's son Mitchell bought his first house. The $30,000 down payment came from a family loan that was never repaid. Grandma's financial records showed a corresponding withdrawal marked Emergency Assistance for Vera. The pattern was clear. Grandma had been the family bank for years, and everyone had been making withdrawals without my knowledge. The total? Just over $300 or zero in gifts and loans to various family members between 2019 and 2022. But here's what made it criminal. After Grandma's dementia diagnosis, the withdrawals didn't stop. They accelerated. Someone with power of attorney had continued accessing her accounts, making transfers, moving money. And according to the legal documents I'd reviewed, that power of attorney had been granted to Camille in a hastily arranged meeting at Grandma's neurologist's office, the same day Dr. I. Patel's notes indicated Grandma had been unable to recognize her own daughter. I pulled up the recording I'd made 6 months ago, when I'd finally confronted Camille about the missing funds. I'd installed a recording app on my phone before the conversation, knowing she'd deny everything. Her voice came through clearly. "Your grandmother wanted to help her family. You're being paranoid, Rowan. This is why nobody tells you anything. You always assume the worst. Mom, there's $83,000 missing from her account in the last year alone. Medical expenses. You know how expensive her care has been. I have all the medical bills. They don't match these withdrawals." A long pause, then. "You know what your problem is? You've never understood that family takes care of family. Blair needed help with her business. Your father and I needed to secure our retirement. This is what people do." While Grandma was mentally incompetent, while I was the only one actually caring for her. You chose to waste your time playing nurse. Nobody asked you to put your life on hold. I'd ended the call there, but I'd kept the recording, along with the 17 others documenting similar conversations with various family members over the past 2 years. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from a number I didn't recognize. "We need to talk. This is Sienna, Blair's attorney. Your mother hired me to represent the family in the will dispute. We can settle this quietly." I smiled and typed back, "I'm happy to settle. Return the $127,000 I spent on Grandma's care, plus the $300,000 in fraudulent withdrawals from her accounts, plus interest. I'll send you the full accounting." The response came 30 seconds later. "That's not how estate law works. Let's be reasonable." I am being reasonable. I'm not pressing criminal charges. Yet. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Then, criminal charges? I didn't respond. Let them wonder exactly what I knew and what I could prove. Instead, I opened another file, this one containing the real nuclear option. During one of Grandma's lucid moments about 8 months before she died, she told me something that had seemed like confused rambling at the time. "The house isn't worth what they think," she'd said. "Declan found termites, major structural damage. I never told anyone because they'd just fight about it." Declan had been Grandma's neighbor, a retired contractor who'd helped her with home repairs for 20 years. When I'd tracked him down last year, he'd shown me the inspection report he'd completed for Grandma in 2020. $340,000 in necessary repairs for foundation issues, termite damage, and black mold in the walls. The house my family was currently fighting over, the one they thought was worth $600,000, it was worth maybe $260,000, and that was being generous. Grandma had known. She'd kept it quiet because she knew exactly what would happen. They'd force her to sell, take the money, and leave her with nothing. But Grandma had been smarter than they'd given her credit for. She'd transferred the house into a trust 3 years ago, one that specified exact conditions for sale or transfer, and she'd made me the trustee. A new email arrived, this time from Graham. "Your mother is devastated. How could you do this to your own family? Come to the house tomorrow at noon. We need to discuss this like adults." I checked my calendar. Tomorrow at noon, I had an appointment with the district attorney's elder abuse division. I'd been building this case for months, waiting for exactly the right moment to file, the moment when my family was so focused on fighting me over the inheritance that they wouldn't see the criminal investigation coming. I typed back, "I'll be there at 12:30. Make sure everyone is present. We're going to have a very thorough conversation about Grandma's finances." That evening, I met with Mrs. Chen at her office. She'd reviewed all my documentation, cross-referenced it with her own records, and compiled a preliminary report. "This is the most comprehensive case I've seen in 30 years of practice," she said, sliding the report across her desk. "You've essentially built an airtight fraud case against your own family." "They made it easy," I replied. "They assumed I was too focused on Grandma to notice what they were doing." "The video recordings of your grandmother are particularly compelling. She was very clear about her intentions. I'd made those videos during Grandma's good days, when the medication cocktails aligned and her mind cleared like fog lifting from a valley. She'd been furious when she'd learned what Camille and the others had been doing, accessing her accounts, making decisions without her consent. I want them to know, she'd said directly to the camera, her eyes sharp with anger I rarely saw. I want them to know that I saw exactly what they were, that Rowan was the only one who cared, and I want them to get exactly what they deserve. Nothing. Mrs. Chen cleared her throat. There's something else you should know. That attorney Blair hired, Sienna? She called me this afternoon asking about settlement options. I got the impression they're already worried about what you might have. They should be. Rowan, I have to ask, are you prepared for how ugly this is going to get? These cases destroy families. I thought about the dollar bill in my jacket pocket. About 1,400 days of watching Grandma slip away while my family counted her money. About Blair's Instagram posts from Paris while I was changing adult diapers and managing medication schedules. Mrs. Chen, they destroyed the family years ago. I'm just documenting it. The next morning, I woke to find my car windows had been smashed. Nothing was stolen, just vandalized. I took pictures, filed a police report, and added it to the growing file labeled Harassment and Intimidation Attempts. At 11:45 a.m., I received a text from an unknown number. You're making a huge mistake. Back off or you'll regret it. I forwarded it to my attorney and to the detective I'd been working with on the elder abuse case. At 12:30 p.m. exactly, I pulled up to my childhood home, the house where I'd grown up feeling invisible, where Blair's accomplishments had been celebrated while mine had been expected. Graham's car was in the driveway, along with Camille's SUV and Blair's convertible. Through the window, I could see Aunt Vera's distinctive red hair. I gathered my briefcase, checked that my phone's recording app was running, and walked up the front steps. Whatever happened in the next hour, they'd handed me exactly what I needed, all of them in one place, with their guard down, convinced they could intimidate or manipulate me into backing down. They'd forgotten that I'd spent 3 years watching someone I loved lose everything that made them who they were. They'd forgotten that I'd documented every moment of their cruelty. Most importantly, they'd forgotten that in my profession, patience wasn't just a virtue, it was a weapon, and I'd been very, very patient. The intervention-style seating arrangement was almost comical. Graham and Camille sat on the main sofa like judge and jury, Blair perched on the armrest beside them with her phone clutched like a security blanket. Aunt Vera commanded the wingback chair by the fireplace, while Mitchell stood near the door with his arms crossed, presumably to block my exit, though he'd always been more decorative than functional. "Sit down, Rowan," Graham said, gesturing to the single chair they'd positioned in the center of the room, an interrogation setup. "We need to talk about your behavior." I remained standing. "Actually, we need to talk about wire fraud, elder abuse, and falsification of legal documents. But sure, let's start with my behavior." Camille's face flushed. "How dare you speak to your father that way? How dare I?" I pulled out my tablet, pulling up the first bank statement. "Let's talk about daring. Who dared to withdraw $15 from Grandma's account on March 3rd, 2022? The same day her medical records show she didn't recognize her own name." "That was for her care," Camille snapped. "Was it? Because I have the care facility bills. That month cost $400. Where did the other $600 go?" I swiped to the next screen. "Oh wait, here's a deposit into your personal account for $600 on March 5th. What an interesting coincidence." Blair's face had gone pale. "Mom, you said all of Grandma's money went to her care." "It did. Rowan is twisting things, making it look worse than it was." "Then explain this." I pulled up the property records. In 2021, you took out a home equity line of credit on Grandma's house for $75,000 without her knowledge, while she was legally incompetent. The silence was absolute. "That's a felony," I continued calmly. "It's called financial exploitation of an elderly person. 5 to 10 years in state prison." Graham stood abruptly. "You're not going to turn this into some kind of legal circus. Your grandmother was confused. We were helping manage her affairs." "Helping manage them?" I laughed, a sound that surprised even me with its bitterness. "You were looting them. Let me show you what actual management looks like." I opened my briefcase and pulled out a 3-inch thick binder, dropping it onto the coffee table with a satisfying thud. "This is every medical bill, every care expense, every medication cost, every therapy session for the last 3 years. Organized by date, cross-referenced with insurance claims, highlighted to show out-of-pocket expenses. Total documented care costs, $183,000. I dropped a second binder beside it. This is every withdrawal from Grandma's accounts during the same period. Total, $437,000. That's a $254,000 discrepancy. Want to guess where it went? Aunt Vera found her voice. We're her family. She wanted to help us. Did she? I pulled out my phone and connected it to the TV on the wall. They'd left it on, probably planning to intimidate me with some presentation of their own. Instead, Grandma's face filled the screen, sitting in her favorite chair on one of her clearer days about 7 months before she died. This is Lillian Rose Hayes, Grandma said clearly, looking directly at the camera. Today is February 14th, 2024. I am recording this with my granddaughter Rowan, who has been my primary caregiver since my diagnosis. I want to be very clear about several things. I watched my family's faces as Grandma continued, her voice steady and firm. My daughter Camille has been stealing from me. I know about the power of attorney she tricked me into signing when I was heavily medicated. I know about the withdrawals, the credit line, the transfers to Blair. I know about all of it, and I want it stopped. Rowan is the only one I trust. She's the only one who's been here when it mattered. The video continued for 12 minutes, with Grandma methodically listing every suspicious transaction, every lie, every betrayal. Dr. Patel appeared at the end, confirming on camera that Grandma had been completely lucid during the recording, that her statements were made without coercion, and that this represented her true wishes. When it ended, Camille was crying. Not the delicate tears she used to manipulate Graham, but ugly, desperate sobbing. She didn't understand, Camille choked out. The dementia made her paranoid. Dr. Patel certified her competent that day. We had 3 witnesses. This recording alone invalidates everything you've done. I turned to Blair. Tell me, sis, did you know the money for your art studio came from stealing from our dying grandmother? I didn't know. Blair's voice was shrill. Mom said Grandma wanted to help. And you never questioned it? Never wondered why Grandma was being so generous while I was the only one visiting her? I pulled up her Instagram on my phone. Here's you in Barcelona, posted the same week Grandma had her first major health crisis. And here's you in Napa Valley when she was in the hospital with pneumonia. And look, here's you getting a $300 facial the day before she died. That's not fair. What's not fair is watching someone die alone while their family fights over the scraps. My voice cracked slightly, but I pushed through. What's not fair is spending your entire savings on someone else's medical care, while the family that should have helped steals whatever is left. Graham moved toward me, his face red with anger. You self-righteous little... Stop. The word came out hard as stone. Take one more step toward me and I'm calling the police. We're being recorded right now and I have a restraining order application ready to file based on the threats I've been receiving. He froze. Here's what's going to happen, I continued. Tomorrow, I'm meeting with a prosecutor from the Elder Abuse Division. I'm handing over every piece of evidence I've collected. Bank records, medical files, recorded conversations, video testimony from Grandma, statements from her doctors, nurses, and caregivers. All of it. You're bluffing, Vera said, but her voice wavered. Am I? I pulled out a business card, tossing it onto the coffee table. That's Detective Hayes, no relation, from the Financial Crimes Unit. Call him. Ask him about case number 2024 EA 1847. That's the investigation into your financial exploitation of an elderly family member. Mitchell spoke for the first time. You'd really send your own family to prison? You'd really steal from your own grandmother while she was dying? I shot back. At least I have the excuse of doing the right thing. I gathered my briefcase, leaving the binders on the table. I had copies of everything. The will contest hearing is in 12 days. Mrs. Chen has all the documentation. You can try to fight it, but you'll lose. The only question is whether you go to prison too. Wait. Camille stood, her makeup streaked with tears. What do you want? Name your price. We can settle this quietly. The question I'd been waiting for. You think this is about money? I walked to the mantel, where family photos displayed our carefully constructed fiction. Blair's graduation, The family vacation to Yellowstone that I'd paid for but been cropped out of in the displayed photo. Graham and Camille's anniversary party where I'd been thanked for helping with the arrangements. Code for doing all the work. I turned back to face them. This isn't about money. This is about justice. This is about Grandma dying knowing her own family cared more about her bank account than her life. This is about 3 years of my life spent caring for someone while all of you circled like vultures. We can pay you back, Blair said desperately. Whatever you spent, we'll... With what money? The house you think you're inheriting is practically worthless. The foundation is collapsing. There's $340, $1,000 in repairs needed just to make it habitable. I watched their faces process this. Didn't know that, did you? Grandma knew. She had it inspected in 2020. She kept it quiet because she knew you'd force her to sell and take the money. Vera's voice was barely a whisper. That's not possible. I have the inspection report from Declan, Grandma's neighbor. The same Declan who's willing to testify about all the times Blair showed up asking if Grandma had mentioned any money while she was still alive. I moved toward the door, but stopped when Camille spoke again. I'm your mother. How can you do this to me? The question hung in the air like an accusation. I turned slowly, looking at this woman who'd given birth to me but never really seen me. You were my mother, I said quietly. Past tense. You stopped being my mother the first time you took Blair's side when she bullied me in middle school. You stopped being my mother when you told me to major in something practical while paying for Blair's art degree. You stopped being my mother every time you dismissed my accomplishments and celebrated hers. And you definitely stopped being my mother when you stole from the woman who actually loved me while I was trying to keep her alive. I opened the door, pausing in the threshold. The hearing is November 18th at 2 p.m. Bring your attorney. Bring whatever evidence you think will help. But know this. I've spent 3 years building this case with the same attention to detail I use to take down corporations. You're not fighting angry Rowan. You're fighting forensic accountant Rowan, and she never loses. As I walked to my car, I heard Camille's wail through the closed door, followed by the crash of something being thrown. My hands shook as I started the engine, adrenaline finally catching up with me. My phone rang. Mrs. Chen, I'm assuming the family meeting didn't go well? She asked. Define well. They're going to fight this with everything they have, Rowan. Are you prepared for that? I thought about Grandma's last coherent words to me, whispered in the hospital 3 days before she died. Make them pay for what they've done. Not just to me, to you. Make them understand they can't treat people like this. I've been preparing for this my whole life, I told Mrs. Chen. I just didn't know it until now. That night, alone in my apartment, I finally let myself feel the weight of what I'd started. This wasn't just about the will anymore. This was about dismantling the carefully constructed lie my family had built. The lie that their love was conditional on compliance, that family meant enabling their worst behaviors, that speaking truth was betrayal. I pulled up the recording from today's confrontation, backing it up to 3 separate cloud services. Then I opened the file containing Grandma's true will, the one Mrs. Chen would read at the hearing, the one that left everything to me with very specific instructions about what to do with it. And most importantly, the one that included a final message for each family member, written in Grandma's own hand during one of her clearest days, explaining exactly why they were receiving nothing. They thought the fight was about money. They thought I wanted revenge because I'd been excluded from the inheritance. They had no idea that Grandma and I had spent those quiet evenings doing more than managing her care. We'd been planning, documenting, building a case not just for the courts but for history. The Hayes family was about to learn that the quiet granddaughter they'd ignored for 3 decades was actually the most dangerous person in the room. Because I didn't just want to win. I wanted them to understand, completely and irrevocably, exactly what they'd lost when they chose greed over love. The district attorney's conference room smelled like stale coffee and institutional carpet. Detective Hayes, a coincidence of surnames that always made people do a double take, sat across from me reviewing the binders I'd compiled. Beside him, Assistant DA Nolan Quinn flipped through the documented evidence with the methodical precision of someone who'd seen every scheme humanity could devise. This is exceptional work, Quinn said, not looking up from the bank statements. Most elder abuse cases we get have maybe a dozen documented incidents. You have hundreds. I'm thorough. You're a forensic accountant, Detective Hayes corrected, finally looking up. This isn't just thorough, this is prosecution ready. You've essentially done our job for us. I'd spent 4 hours walking them through every transaction, every forged signature, every withdrawal made while Grandma was medically incapable of consent. The timeline was damning. Camille had started small in 2019, testing whether anyone would notice $3, $1,000 here, $5, $1,000 there. When no one questioned it, the amounts grew. By 2022, she was withdrawing tens of thousands at a time, hiding it through shell transfers and cash withdrawals that left no paper trail. Except there was a paper trail, because I'd subpoenaed every bank record, cross-referenced every date with Grandma's medical charts, and matched every suspicious transaction to a corresponding benefit for a family member. Quinn set down his pen. The power of attorney fraud alone is worth 5 years. The systematic theft from an incompetent person, that's another 7 to 10. And this, he tapped the evidence of the forged will, this is the kind of case that gets national media attention. I don't want media attention, I said quickly. I want them held accountable. Unfortunately, you don't get to choose. Quinn's expression was sympathetic, but firm. When we arrest 3 members of the same family for defrauding their dying mother, the press will find out. This will be public. My stomach twisted. I'd imagined the legal victory, the moment of vindication. But I hadn't fully considered what it would mean to have our family's ugliness dissected in newspapers and on social media. However, Detective Hayes interjected, we can control the timing. If you're willing to testify at the will contest hearing first, we can wait to file charges until after the civil case concludes. Give you time to secure the estate before this becomes a criminal matter. Why would you do that? Quinn smiled grimly. Because your testimony will be stronger if you've already proven the fraud in civil court. And frankly, watching them fight over an inheritance they obtained through fraud before arresting them for fraud has a certain poetic justice. I left the DA's office with a court date and a promise. They would move forward with charges immediately after the will contest concluded. 5 days from now. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. We need to talk. Meet me at Riverside Park, North Entrance, 6 p.m. Come alone. B. Blair. My instinct was to ignore it, but curiosity won. I forwarded the message to Tyler, my ex-boyfriend who was now a lawyer specializing in family law, and asked him to meet me nearby as backup. Riverside Park at 6 p.m. was deserted except for a few joggers. Blair sat on a bench overlooking the river, wearing sunglasses despite the overcast sky. She'd lost weight, stress probably, and her usually perfect hair was pulled into a messy ponytail. You came, she said, not looking at me. You asked. I need you to understand something. Her voice was tight, controlled. I didn't know. About the stealing. About Grandma being incompetent when Mom had her sign things. I really didn't know. But you suspected? She turned then, pulling off the sunglasses. Her eyes were red and swollen. Of course I suspected. Money kept appearing when I needed it. Mom always had an explanation. Always said Grandma wanted to help. But I didn't ask questions because I didn't want to know the answers. That's not an excuse, Blair. I know. She stood pacing to the railing. I've spent the last 3 days going through my finances, trying to figure out how much I took. It's $127,000 over 5 years. That's more than you spent on her care. The number hit me like a physical blow. You kept receipts? I keep everything, spreadsheets mostly. It's how I justify things to myself. If it's in a spreadsheet, it's real, it's legitimate. She laughed bitterly. I can show you exactly how I spent Grandma's money while she was dying. The art supplies, the studio rent, the business courses that went nowhere. All of it documented in excruciating detail. I didn't know what to say. This wasn't the Blair I expected. The defensive, entitled sister, who'd always blamed others for her failures. I want to pay it back, she continued. All of it. I've already contacted a lawyer about liquidating my assets. I don't have much, but I can sell the car, the studio equipment, the apartment furnishings. I can probably get together $40,000 immediately. And the other $87,000? I'll work it off, however long it takes. She met my eyes. I'm not asking you to drop the case. I deserve whatever happens. But I need you to know that I see it now. What we did. What I let happen. I wanted to feel vindicated, triumphant. Instead, I just felt tired. Why now, Blair? Why not 3 years ago when I was begging for help with her care? Because I'm a coward. Her voice broke. Because it was easier to believe Mom's lies than to face what we were doing. Because I didn't want to be the bad guy in my own story. We stood in silence, watching the river flow past, carrying leaves and debris downstream. There's something else you should know, Blair said finally. Mom's planning something. I heard her on the phone with Aunt Vera yesterday. They're hiring a private investigator to dig up dirt on you, trying to find anything they can use to discredit you at the hearing. Let them look. I've got nothing to hide. That's what I told them, but they're desperate, Rowan. And desperate people do stupid things. She pulled a flash drive from her pocket. This has recordings of their planning conversations. I've been recording everything since you dropped those binders on the coffee table. I thought you might need them. I took the drive, turning it over in my hands. Why are you helping me? Because Grandma deserved better, and because... She paused, wiping her eyes. Because you deserved better, too. I spent 30 years being the favorite, and I never once questioned whether I'd earned it. I just assumed I was special, that I deserved more attention, more money, more love. She turned to face me fully. But you were the special one. You're the one who showed up, who did the hard work, who loved Grandma when it wasn't convenient or profitable, and I... Her voice cracked. I helped steal from both of you. Blair... I'm going to testify against them at the hearing, she said firmly. Mom, Dad, Vera, all of them. I'm going to tell the truth about every dollar I took, every conversation I overheard, every time I knew something was wrong and did nothing. They'll destroy you. Good. Maybe I'll finally build something real from the ruins. After she left, I sat on the bench for another hour, processing this unexpected development. Blair's betrayal had been one of the hardest parts of this whole mess. The sister I'd once idolized, choosing our parents over me, over truth, over decency. But maybe people could change. Maybe recognizing you were wrong was the first step toward becoming someone worth forgiving. Not that I was ready to forgive. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But I could acknowledge that Blair taking responsibility meant something, even if it was 3 years too late. The will contest hearing arrived with the cold precision of January rain. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, wood-paneled and institutional, with fluorescent lights that made everyone look slightly jaundiced. Mrs. Chen sat beside me at the petitioner's table, her face professionally neutral. Across the aisle, Camille, Graham, and Aunt Vera huddled with their attorney, Sienna, who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. Blair sat in the gallery behind me. When Camille noticed, she let out a small gasp of betrayal that echoed in the quiet room. The judge, a stern woman named Delilah Morrison with silver hair and reading glasses perched on her nose, called the court to order. We're here to address the validity of 2 competing wills for the estate of Lillian Rose Hayes, she began, looking over her glasses at both sides. Ms. Chen, you're representing the petitioner challenging the later will? Yes, Your Honor. We believe the will executed 18 months ago was obtained through fraud and exploitation of an incompetent person. Judge Morrison turned to Sienna. And you're representing the beneficiaries of that will? We are, Your Honor. We maintain that Mrs. Hayes was of sound mind and that this challenge is motivated by the petitioner's anger at being excluded from the inheritance. Then let's begin with evidence. Judge Morrison gestured to Mrs. Chen. Petitioner goes first. Mrs. Chen stood, pulling up the first exhibit on the courtroom's display screen. Grandma's medical records, highlighted to show the dates of cognitive decline. Your Honor, the will in question was executed on March 15, 2023. On that date, according to medical records from Dr. Patel, Mrs. Hayes was experiencing severe dementia symptoms including inability to recognize family members, confusion about time and place, and complete disorientation. She clicked to the next slide, the hospital admission log showing Grandma had been given morphine and anti-anxiety medication that morning. Furthermore, the medications administered would have made it impossible for Mrs. Hayes to understand a complex legal document, yet somehow she managed to sign a will, understand its contents, and express her intentions clearly enough to satisfy 2 witnesses. Sienna stood. Objection, Your Honor. Dementia patients have periods of lucidity. It's possible Mrs. Hayes was having a clear moment when she signed the will. Then you'll have medical testimony to that effect? Judge Morrison asked. Sienna hesitated. We are working on obtaining expert witnesses. I have expert witnesses right now, Mrs. Chen said smoothly. Dr. Patel is here and prepared to testify that based on his examination notes, Mrs. Hayes would not have been capable of executing a valid will that day. The doctor's testimony was devastating. He walked the court through Grandma's cognitive decline, the specific medications and their effects, and his professional opinion that the will signing had been medically impossible. Then came the bank records, the timeline of withdrawals, the power of attorney that had been signed on a day when Grandma couldn't spell her own name, and finally, the video. The courtroom fell silent as Grandma's face filled the screen, clear-eyed and firm, explaining exactly what had been done to her and why she wanted it stopped. When it ended, Judge Morrison looked at Camille with something approaching disgust. Mrs. Hayes, she said, I'm going to give you one opportunity to respond to these allegations before I make my ruling. Camille stood shakily. My mother was ill. We were trying to help manage her affairs. If mistakes were made, mistakes. The judge's voice cut like ice. This evidence suggests systematic financial exploitation of a vulnerable elderly person. That's not a mistake. That's a crime. She turned to Mrs. Chen. I'm invalidating the will, dated March 15th, 2023, on grounds of lack of testamentary capacity and undue influence. The earlier will, dated 3 years prior, appears to have been executed during a period of clear mental competency, and I'm declaring it valid. I felt the world shift, reality rearranging itself around this single moment of justice. Furthermore, Judge Morrison continued, I'm referring this case to the District Attorney's Office for Criminal Investigation. The evidence presented here suggests multiple violations of elder abuse statutes. Camille collapsed back into her chair. Graham's face went white, and Aunt Vera actually let out a small sob. Ms. Rowan, the judge said, looking directly at me, I'm truly sorry for what your family put you through, and I'm sorry for what they put Mrs. Hayes through. No one should have to die knowing their own family cared more about money than about them. As we filed out of the courtroom, Camille tried to approach me, but Detective Hayes was waiting in the hallway with 2 uniformed officers. Camille Hayes, Graham Hayes, Vera Mitchell, you're under arrest for financial exploitation of an elderly person, fraud, and conspiracy. The reading of rights, the handcuffs, the perp walk through the courthouse hallway where yesterday's family photo would have shown us smiling together. Blair stood beside me, tears streaming down her face, but she didn't try to intervene. She'd made her choice, and I'd made mine. The preliminary hearing 3 weeks later drew reporters from every local news station. Daughter arrested for defrauding dying mother made front-page news. My phone exploded with interview requests, messages from childhood acquaintances I hadn't heard from in years, and support from unexpected corners. I declined all media requests. This wasn't about publicity or revenge porn for public consumption. This was about justice. The prosecution's case was built on the foundation I'd provided. Every document, every recording, every piece of evidence I'd meticulously collected over 3 years became part of the official record. Quinn presented it with the clinical precision of a surgeon, methodically dismantling every defense Sienna attempted. Camille's attorney tried to paint her as a devoted daughter overwhelmed by caregiving responsibilities. Quinn countered with my care logs, showing I'd handled 97% of Grandma's care, while Camille was shopping online and taking spa vacations. Graham's attorney claimed he'd been unaware of the financial manipulation. Quinn presented recordings where Graham explicitly discussed accessing Mom's accounts and making sure Rowan doesn't interfere with our plans. Aunt Vera's attorney attempted to argue she'd simply accepted gifts from her mother. Quinn showed the bank transfers, the forged signatures, the systematic looting of accounts while Grandma lay dying. Blair took the stand on day 3. Her testimony was quiet, factual, and utterly damning. My mother told me Grandma wanted to help with my business, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't question it because I didn't want to know if it was a lie. I chose convenience over truth, and I've had to live with that choice every day since. When Quinn asked about the recordings she'd provided, Blair detailed conversations where Camille had explicitly discussed managing Grandma's estate to ensure Rowan doesn't get anything. "Did you object to these plans?" Quinn asked. "No." Blair's voice broke. "I didn't object because I was benefiting from them. I was complicit through my silence." Cross-examination tried to break her, to suggest she'd been manipulated into testifying against her family. But Blair held firm. "Nobody manipulated me," she said. "My sister showed me the truth, and I finally had the courage to face it." The trial lasted 2 weeks. The jury deliberated for 90 minutes. Guilty on all counts. Sentencing came a month later. Judge Morrison showed no mercy. "This court has seen many cases of financial elder abuse," she said, looking at Camille, Graham, and Vera with undisguised contempt. "But rarely do we see such calculated, systematic exploitation of a dying family member. You didn't just steal money, you stole her dignity, her peace, and her ability to trust the people who should have protected her." Camille, 8 years in state prison. Graham, 7 years. Aunt Vera, 5 years for her role in the conspiracy. Mitchell, who'd taken a plea deal in exchange for testimony, received probation and community service. He'd been a follower, not a leader, in the scheme. As they were led away in handcuffs, Camille turned to look at me one final time. Not with rage or hatred, but with something worse. Incomprehension. She still didn't understand what she'd done wrong. The estate settlement took another 6 months to finalize. Grandma's real will was exactly what she'd told me it would be. Everything to me, with specific instructions. The house, once the foundation issues were repaired at a cost of $340,000, was to be donated to a nonprofit that provided transitional housing for elderly people escaping financial abuse by family members. Grandma had been very specific about this. She wanted something good to come from her suffering. Her investments, after taxes and legal fees, came to $630,000. Half went into a trust fund dedicated to supporting caregivers who sacrificed their careers to care for aging family members. The other half was mine, with instructions to build something that matters. The jewelry, the personal effects, the photo albums, those went to me with a note in Grandma's handwriting. These are the memories that mattered, not the money, never the money. Blair's restitution payments arrived monthly like clockwork. She'd sold everything, moved into a small apartment and taken a job as a bookkeeper. Ironic, given our family history. She sent detailed accounting of every payment along with brief notes. Month 4, $3, $200 paid, $83, $800 remaining. Started therapy. It helps. Month 8, $3, $200 paid, $71 remaining. Got promoted. Boss says I'm good with numbers. Month 12, $3, $200 paid, $58, $600 remaining. Visited Grandma's grave today. Told her I was sorry. I think she heard me. I didn't respond to the notes, but I kept them. Evidence of change, or at least the attempt at it. Tyler, my ex-boyfriend turned attorney, became something more than an ex. He'd stood beside me through every court appearance, every media inquiry, every moment when the weight of what I'd done threatened to crush me. "You did the right thing," he'd say whenever doubt crept in. "Justice isn't always comfortable, but it's necessary." We were sitting in his apartment 6 months after the sentencing, reviewing the final estate documents, when he asked the question I'd been avoiding. "What now?" I looked at the paperwork spread across his coffee table. The deed to Grandma's house, soon to be transferred to the nonprofit. The investment statements showing the trust fund for caregivers, the personal checking account that now held more money than I'd ever imagined having. "Now I build something that matters," I said. Like Grandma wanted. The Hayes Family Caregiver Foundation launched a year after Grandma's death. It provided financial assistance to people who'd sacrificed careers to care for aging family members, offered legal support for those facing exploitation, and funded respite care so caregivers could have breaks without guilt. The first grant recipient was a woman named Autumn, 42, who'd spent 5 years caring for her father with Alzheimer's while her siblings fought over his assets. She'd lost her job, her savings, and nearly her sanity. The foundation paid for a year of respite care and legal representation to protect her father's estate. "You saved my life," she told me at the foundation's first anniversary event. I was drowning and nobody cared. Nobody saw me. "I saw you," I replied, "because I was you." The foundation grew. Within 3 years, we'd helped over 200 caregivers, prevented dozens of elder abuse cases, and become a resource for prosecutors building cases against financial exploitation. I quit my job as a forensic accountant and became the foundation's director. The work was harder, the pay was worse, but every person we helped felt like a small piece of Grandma's justice spreading out into the world. Blair attended the foundation's 3rd anniversary gala. She'd paid off her restitution 2 months early, working double shifts and living on almost nothing. When I'd asked her why she'd pushed so hard, she'd said, "Because I need to prove to myself that I can finish something I start, that I can be someone worth respecting." At the gala, she handed me an envelope. "What's this?" "Open it." Inside was a check for $50 and a letter explaining that she'd received a small inheritance from a distant aunt, someone who died without knowing about the family scandal. Instead of keeping it, Blair was donating it to the foundation. "It's not enough," she said quietly. "It'll never be enough, but it's something." I looked at my sister, thinner, older, marked by consequences, but somehow more real than she'd ever been. "Thank you," I said, and meant it. The media eventually lost interest in our story. The family scandal became just another cautionary tale about greed and exploitation. But for the people we helped through the foundation, it remained immediate and urgent. I never visited Camille, Graham, or Aunt Vera in prison. They sent letters occasionally. Vera's were apologetic, Graham's were defensive, Camille's were incomprehensible ramblings that blamed everyone but herself. I read them once, filed them away, and moved on. The dollar bill they'd given me at the will reading? I had it framed and hung in the foundation's office with a small plaque. What they thought I was worth. What Grandma knew I deserved. Remember the difference. On the 5th anniversary of Grandma's death, I visited her grave with Tyler and Blair. We brought flowers, roses, her favorite, and stood in silence for a while. "I think she'd be proud," Blair said softly. "Of the foundation, of what you've built." "Of what we've built," I corrected. Blair had been volunteering at the foundation for 2 years, using her experience with financial manipulation to help victims recognize the warning signs. "You're part of this too." Tyler squeezed my hand. We'd gotten engaged 3 months earlier, a quiet proposal with no family drama, just 2 people who'd weathered storms and chosen each other anyway. As we walked back to the car, I thought about revenge, about justice, about the difference between the two. My family had wanted to humiliate me, to reduce me to that single dollar bill, worthless and easily dismissed. Instead, they'd given me the greatest gift possible, clarity about who they really were and who I could become in spite of them. The foundation had helped over 500 families now. 500 people who'd been invisible, undervalued, exploited by the people who should have protected them. 500 people who learned that someone saw them, valued them, believed them. That was worth more than any inheritance, more than any revenge, more than the hollow satisfaction of watching my family destroyed. This was what Grandma had meant by build something that matters. Not a monument to my pain or their sins, but a living, breathing testament to the truth that love is demonstrated through action, not words. That showing up matters. That the quiet work of caregiving deserves recognition and protection. That some debts can never be repaid, but some wrongs can be transformed into something beautiful. My family had tried to reduce me to nothing. Instead, they'd revealed exactly what I was capable of when pushed beyond my limits, and I'd built an empire of compassion from the ashes of their cruelty. The letter arrived on the foundation's 7th anniversary, forwarded from the prison. Camille's handwriting was shakier than I remembered, the loops less confident. "Dear Rowan, I know you won't read this, but I need to write it anyway. The parole board meets next month. My attorney says I have a good chance of early release for good behavior. I wanted you to hear it from me first, not the news." I set the letter aside and pulled up the victim notification system. Sure enough, Camille's parole hearing was scheduled for 6 weeks from now. Under the law, I had the right to attend and make a statement. Tyler found me staring at the computer screen an hour later. "You don't have to go," he said gently. "You don't owe her anything." "I know, but I think I need to." The parole hearing room was smaller than the courtroom had been, more intimate in its institutional bleakness. Camille sat at a table in her prison-issued clothing, her hair completely gray now, her face lined with years that had been harder than anything she'd experienced in her comfortable suburban life. She didn't look at me as I entered. The parole board members reviewed her case. Model prisoner, participated in rehabilitation programs, expressed remorse. Her attorney made an impassioned plea about a mother separated from her family, about rehabilitation and second chances. Then it was my turn. "Ms. Hayes, you have the right to make a statement as the victim in this case," the board chairman said. "Would you like to speak?" I stood, feeling the weight of 7 years of consequences, of growth, of transformation. "My name is Rowan Hayes, and Camille is my mother, or was my mother. I'm not sure which tense is appropriate anymore." Camille flinched but still didn't look at me. When I think about what she did, the theft, the fraud, the systematic exploitation of a dying woman, I could focus on the criminal acts. But that's not what hurt the most. What hurt was the betrayal of every value she'd supposedly taught me. She raised me to believe family meant loyalty, that love meant sacrifice, that doing the right thing mattered. Then she showed me that none of it applied when money was involved. I looked directly at her now. She met my eyes for the first time, and I saw something there I hadn't expected: genuine shame. My grandmother died believing her daughter had stolen from her. She died knowing the family she'd supported for decades cared more about her bank account than her well-being. That knowledge poisoned her final months, and nothing can give those back to her. Camille's attorney started to object, but I raised my hand. "However, I'm not here to oppose her parole. I'm here to state facts for the record, nothing more. She served 7 years of an 8-year sentence. She's participated in rehabilitation programs. According to the reports, she's expressed genuine remorse." I pulled out a document from my briefcase. This is a statement from the Hayes Family Caregiver Foundation. Since its founding 7 years ago, we've helped over 800 families facing similar exploitation. We've prevented millions of dollars in elder abuse. We've changed laws in 3 states to better protect vulnerable seniors. I slid it across to the board chairman. That foundation exists because of what my mother did. Her crimes revealed a systemic problem that needed addressing. In a twisted way, her actions created something good. Camille was crying now, silent tears streaming down her face. "So my statement is this: grant the parole if you believe she's been rehabilitated. Deny it if you don't. But know that either way, I've moved past needing revenge. The foundation is my peace. The families we've helped are my justice. Her punishment or release doesn't change what I've built from the rubble of our family." The board deliberated for 20 minutes before announcing their decision. Parole granted, with strict conditions including restitution payments to the foundation, mandatory therapy, and prohibited contact with me unless I initiated it. As we filed out, Camille approached me in the hallway, her attorney hovering nervously nearby. "Rowan, she started. "Don't." I held up my hand. "Don't apologize. Don't explain. Don't ask for forgiveness. I meant what I said in there. I've moved past needing anything from you." "I know. I just wanted to say that the foundation, what you've built, it's extraordinary. Your grandmother would be so proud." She was proud, before you destroyed her trust in her own family. Camille absorbed this like a physical blow. "I deserve that. I deserve all of it." "You do, but that's between you and whatever peace you manage to find. I'm done carrying the weight of your choices." 3 months later, Blair called with news. Camille had gotten a job as a bookkeeper at a small nonprofit in another state. She'd moved away from our hometown, started fresh somewhere no one knew the Hayes family scandal. "She's sending checks to the foundation," Blair said. "Small ones, but regular. Her attorney said she wants to contribute to the work you're doing. She can send the money, but I don't want contact." I understand. For what it's worth, I think she finally gets it. What she destroyed. Who she destroyed. Too late for it to matter. Maybe. But not too late for her to try to be someone different going forward. I thought about this conversation later that night, sitting in the office I'd built from Grandma's legacy. The walls were covered with thank you letters from families we'd helped, photos from foundation events, and that framed dollar bill, a reminder of where I'd started. Tyler found me there after midnight, working on grant applications for next year's programs. "You're going to work yourself into exhaustion," he said, setting down a cup of tea beside my laptop. "Someone needs to do the work. You've done the work. You've built something extraordinary. Maybe it's time to let yourself rest a little." I looked at the screen, at the numbers representing lives changed, families protected, justice served in small increments across hundreds of cases. "Maybe," I agreed, "after we finish this grant cycle." He laughed, the sound warm and familiar. "That's what you said about the last grant cycle. This work matters, Tyler. Every family we help is another grandmother who doesn't die feeling betrayed. Another caregiver who doesn't lose everything for doing the right thing." "I know, and that's why I love you. But Grandma wouldn't want you to destroy yourself building her memorial." He was right, of course. The foundation would continue with or without me burning myself out. We had staff now, a board of directors, systems that functioned beyond my obsessive oversight. I shut the laptop. "Tell me something good," I said, "something that has nothing to do with the foundation or family drama or any of it." Tyler pulled up a chair beside me. "The house closes next week. 3 bedrooms, big backyard, perfect for kids someday if we want them." "Kids," I repeated, testing the word. "Would they be Hayes kids or something else?" "They'd be ours. That's all that matters." I thought about that, about building a family that wasn't defined by who had wronged whom, that wasn't bound by obligation and resentment. A family based on choice, on showing up, on love demonstrated through action instead of demanded through blood. "Yeah," I said, "that sounds good." 10 years after the will reading, I stood in front of a congressional committee testifying about elder abuse prevention legislation. The Hayes Family Caregiver Foundation had become a national model, and lawmakers wanted to understand how to replicate our success. The key, I explained to the assembled representatives, is recognizing that financial elder abuse is rarely about money. It's about power, control, and the fundamental betrayal of trust. The perpetrators are almost always family members, and the victims are too ashamed to report it. After my testimony, a representative from Montana approached me. "That was powerful," she said. "I'd like to introduce you to someone." The someone was an elderly woman named Paige, who'd traveled from Montana to advocate for better protections after her son had stolen her life savings. "Nobody believed me," Paige told me, her weathered hands gripping mine. "My daughter-in-law said I was confused, that I'd given him the money willingly. The bank wouldn't help. The police said it was a civil matter. I lost everything because I trusted my own child." I saw myself in her, or rather, I saw Grandma. The betrayal, the isolation, the institutional failures that allowed abuse to continue. "You're believed now," I told her, "and we're going to make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else." The legislation passed 8 months later, strengthening protections for elderly people and creating federal funding for caregiver support programs. The Hayes Family Caregiver Foundation received a grant to expand to all 50 states. Blair had become the foundation's deputy director, using her experience with both perpetration and redemption to connect with families on both sides of abuse situations. She'd gotten married, started a family, built a life defined by who she was becoming rather than who she'd been. "Do you ever forgive them?" she asked me once during a late-night strategy session about expansion plans. Define forgive. Let go of the anger. Stop carrying the weight of what they did. I considered this. I let go of the need for revenge a long time ago. The foundation was better than any vengeance could ever be. But forgive? That implies reconciliation, and I don't want that. I've built peace without them, and that's enough. Fair enough. She paused. For what it's worth, I'm grateful you didn't let me stay who I was. Fighting for the foundation forced me to become someone better. You did that yourself, I just provided the motivation. On the 15th anniversary of Grandma's death, the foundation dedicated a memorial garden at the nonprofit housing complex that occupied her former home. The plaque read, Lillian Rose Hayes. She taught us that love is shown through action, not words, and that the quiet work of caregiving deserves recognition and protection. Camille had asked to attend the ceremony. I'd said no. Graham had died in prison 3 years earlier. Heart attack, sudden and final. Aunt Vera had been released on medical parole and lived in a nursing home, her own declining health a bitter irony given the crimes she'd committed. Mitchell had rebuilt his life, though he kept his distance from all of us, the family name too tainted for reconciliation. And me? I'd built an empire from their ashes. Not an empire of money or power, but of purpose. Every family we helped, every caregiver we supported, every law we changed, each one was a middle finger to the idea that family obligation trumped human decency. The dollar bill still hung in my office, but I'd added something beside it. A photo of Grandma and me from her clearer days, both of us laughing at some long-forgotten joke. She looked happy, present, loved. That was the inheritance that mattered. Not the money, not the house, not even the satisfaction of seeing justice served. The inheritance was the lesson she'd taught through her final act, that some people will always choose greed over love, but the ones who choose differently can change the world. My family had tried to reduce me to nothing, to make me as small as that single dollar bill. Instead, they'd shown me exactly what I was capable of becoming, and I'd become someone worth more than any inheritance could measure. Someone who showed up, someone who cared, someone who built something that mattered. That was the real fortune, and unlike my family's stolen wealth, it was something no one could ever take away.